Okay, so let's take a moment to look at how we route effects, and this can either be done in the hardware world or in the software world. There are some real advantages in the software world because you almost have unlimited effects. But let's imagine we're in the hardware world here and we drop in our effect, and there's really two ways to route this. We can use it as an insert effect and drop that right into, say, the first track, or maybe the third track, or maybe the 8th track. But here's the deal: it can only be in one channel at a time. So if this is a hardware effect, something rack mount that you bought and you spent $500 on it, if you place it in an insert effect, it goes on one channel. And that's not a lot of bang for the buck if you've really saved up and bought a really nice multi-effects processor. Putting it on one channel doesn't give you a lot of bang for the buck. Alternatively, you can put this in an effects loop. In other words, you can take all of your aux sends, which are normally a row of buttons, a row of knobs along your mixer, and you can send differing amounts of each channel out into that effect. So say if you wanted to send out, say, a little bit of channel 1, channel 5 and channel 8, and they could all have differing amounts. Like number 1 could have a lot, number 5 could have only a tiny bit, and number 8 could have a little bit more. You can see by the width of those arrows, they're all sending differing amounts out to that reverb. Well, actually, I kind of gave that away. Out to that effects that we're placing in an effects loop, and then that gets returned in an effects return or an aux return. What kind of effects would you use in an effects loop like this? I kind of gave it away before. Reverb is a great candidate for this because almost all of the channels can use with just a little bit of reverb, and it also speaks to one of the downsides of this, is that in an aux send and return or an effects loop like this, what's the downside? That one effect processor will be on one setting, but you can have differing amounts of it depending on your aux send for each of those channels. So if this was a reverb, in this case, your first channel would have a whole lot of reverb, your 5th channel would have only a tiny bit, and your 8th channel would have a little bit more, and the rest would have no reverb at all. So this is kind of a great way to use, particularly if you're in the hardware world and you spent $500 on an effects processor. You want to use it more than just inserting it into one location. But let's follow this through. And this is both in the hardware and the software world. But let's imagine that we do have a multi-effect like this. How could we use it in more than one way? In other words, in this example, in both these examples, it's only really set up in one way. What we can actually do is print these effects. And this is an example of how we would do that. Imagine we had the multi-effects set up to be distortion, and then we recorded a guitar through that and printed that onto the first track here. So in other words, the guitar goes through into the effect, and that goes onto the track, so that the guitar and the effect are married together and printed onto that track. Now we can go back to that effect processor and we can set up to, say, chorus. Imagine we're going to do an acoustic guitar or something. We could then place that onto the second track, and that's printed. Now set up as a compressor, put that on the 3rd track, and then finally maybe set up to as a pitch shifter, drop that on the 4th track, and then that would be printed onto that 4th track. Now, that's all good. We've got 4 different effects out of one effects processor, but what have we lost? Well, here's one thing for sure. Have you noticed that all these guys, those effects are locked onto those tracks? If you want that guitar minus that distortion, too bad. They're recorded together, right? If it was on an effects end or something like that, you could just dial it down. But they live on the same track. Obviously, the upside of this is that you can use one effect several times, but the downside of it is that you can that all those effects are printed and kind of locked onto that track. We'll look at a lot of other ways to use effects later on this afternoon.